So welcome everyone to Fringe Legal Edge. This is an experimental series of indefinite length where I speak with leaders and experts on how to give your practice an edge, whatever your practice might be, whether you're a practitioner or in knowledge or innovation or something completely different. And today I am absolutely delighted to have Stan Garfield as a guest. Stan is a knowledge management author, speaker, and a leader based out of Northwell in Michigan. He's the author of multiple books, some of which I've started reading, such as Implementing a Successful KM Program. He was the community evangelist in global knowledge services for Deloitte for 8 years. And he is a all-around font of knowledge when it comes to everything KM. I stumbled across some of his work accidentally as I was looking into this area, and I went down a very, very deep rabbit hole. So Stan, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So there's a couple of things I wanted to discuss with you today, but let's start off with something easy. Probably not though. What does knowledge management mean for you? How would you define it to a 10-year-old if you had to?
Well, I get asked that question a lot because many people do not know what it means when I mention that as something that I've been doing for 25 years. So I explain to them that it's taking what one part of an organization knows and reusing it in another part of an organization. So the larger the organization gets, the more likely it is that people are unaware of each other and what they know and what they can do. Knowledge management attempts to address that by connecting people so that they're able to reuse what other parts of the organization have already learned and proved in a different part of the organization.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's a great summary, and I think some of those items will certainly get fleshed out as we discuss. So there's three things I wanted to talk to you about in no certain order whatsoever, and it was around the life cycle of a KM function. So if you are just starting out on that journey, and we can talk about law firms or just generally, what's a good place to start? What are some things that you should be mindful of? And I think continuity is one of those. The second is around maturity. So as you progress further on that journey, how do you know that you're moving into that, that cycle of maturity, that you have a mature function in hand, and what should you do next? And then how do you align the business around what you want to accomplish? So if you wouldn't mind, let's start with starting out. Take it in any way you think is beneficial from there.
So usually knowledge management initiatives get started in one of several ways. Either there's somebody who has a particular passion for it that's trying to get it going, or there's some senior executive that's heard about it or been advised by a consultant or seen some other competitor doing it, and they come back to their company and they say, we should do this. And then they look around to find somebody that they think should lead it. And if somebody that's sort of been doing that kind of thing already, maybe not officially, then they ask them to start. And that's how I got started. We didn't have a knowledge management function at Digital Equipment Corporation when I was asked to lead it back in 1996. But they knew that I was the sort of person that was always into sharing things. And they said, that's the guy. So I was asked to start it up. And when you start it up, it's usually sort of a long and difficult climb, because even if you've been asked to start it, you've got to go out and recruit people to join you in that cause. And you look for similar passionate people who may not have this as their job, but they have this as something that they believe in. And you recruit them together and you form a virtual team and you get started. And the best way to get started is to figure out what are the top 3 opportunities that knowledge management could address. They can be problems to solve, they can be challenges to overcome, or they can be opportunities for improving and doing things better. And I always say there's a combination of ways that you figure out what those 3 objectives are. It's what your own personal vision is of it. Maybe you've been doing knowledge management somewhere else and you bring that with you to a new organization, or you've read about it, or somehow you have an idea of what you think could be done. Then there's the sort of the front level view, the people that are doing the work that you're trying to serve with knowledge management, and what do they perceive as their problems and their pain points and things that they'd like to see better, and finding out from them what those are. And then the third is what the senior executives think is important, right? Why did they ask you to do this in the first place? You're trying to figure out the intersection between those 3. If what the senior executives think should be done aligns with what the people at the front lines are doing, aligns with what you think should be done, and that helps you to narrow it down, because there's a lot of things you could do and you got to narrow it down, otherwise you'll get scattered. So let's say you find out that the number one thing is that people really want to make it easier to find information, that they're struggling with that, and you can figure out a way to address that. and you do, then the people that ask for that will be happy because you solved their problem. The people that put you in place thought that was the problem at the organizational level will be pleased that you potentially solved it. And if something you believe in, then you'll feel fulfilled in having achieved it.
Yeah, and I mean, what I'm certainly hearing from that is a lot of this does require you to go and listen. Certainly, if you are just starting out right on this, as you said, a long and difficult climb, then you need to just put in the work initially to go ask a lot of questions, to listen to what the executives want, maybe observe what the frontline workers, as you put them, are actually doing, what the struggles are, where there could be any sort of gains, whether it's in efficiency or being able to reuse information, being able to collect the information or anything else. What kind, and actually, I don't know if it makes sense for you, but as you were starting out, or as you've now worked with over the many years with others, what kinds of questions or things have been beneficial in asking? Certainly, and I'm thinking more from the executive level, because sometimes it comes at such a high level that it's hard to translate what the executive and strategic requirements are into a functional requirement. So how do you actually go from, I think we need to have a knowledge management function because it's becoming common, to, okay, what do you need to accomplish?
Yeah, what you want to do is take a look at what you perceive to be the mixture of challenges and opportunities. And that can be informed by looking what other people have written about it. For example, I've written an article about the 15 benefits of knowledge management. That's actually been the most popular article that I ever published, because people are often asking that question, why would we do this? In the abstract, they may be able to articulate something, but you want to get more specific. And so if you're able to say, we want to reuse what one part of the organization knows in another part. We want to take advantage of the expertise that we have in our large organization. We want to avoid making the same mistakes more than once. We want to avoid redundant effort. Those are all be examples of the kinds of benefits that you would look at, and then you say, which one of these really fit our case? So if some of them really jump out at you and saying, yeah, we really struggle with finding out what we've done before. Let's say you're in a law firm and they're working on a case, and the question comes up, where have we worked on a similar case before? It'd be nice to be able to readily find that and be able to find materials and find people that worked on that case and talk to them and so forth. So if that's a thing where you talk to people and they all say, yes, that would be great if we could do that, we really struggle with it right now. So you deliver a solution to that problem. Now you got your first success, and then they'll say, great, and now let's tackle the next thing. So I think, yes, you're right about asking questions. I've designed a survey that you can use called an opportunity survey, where you can, in a structured way, ask people these questions and suggest to them, have you ever encountered this problem? Have you ever fought with this struggle? And then if they say, yeah, that's it, then that helps you to get that input from them rather than making it purely open-ended.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, it's really, I like that. Certainly, I'll check out the opportunity survey. What do you think is the role of data in all of this? And you came from an organization that was probably quite heavily data centric, but in answering and looking through these persistent problems, whether it is, how have we worked on this type of case before? Have you used this matter before? Have we used this clause or content before? And all of that kind of stuff. How do have you seen that this is just essentially a gut feel or just getting an anecdotal view? Or do you think it's best to, from the beginning, pair with some sort of a data collection, a metric-driven, measured approach?
Yeah, I think you have to collect data. So the survey that I suggest, if you can get a large number of responses to it, or at least if they're a representative sample, right, that really helps you to proceed on a data-driven basis rather than gut feel. So if someone says, well, why did you tackle that problem? You say, well, we surveyed and we found out that, that 90% of our employees experience this problem. That's a pretty good argument for doing it. You definitely want to then set goals that you can measure. So data comes into it that way. If you say, for example, that we're going to try to capture a brief thumbnail on every case that we've ever worked on, then you have to measure, right? How many cases have we had and how many cases do we capture the thumbnail on? And then you might have another measure, how many of those got reused in a future case, right? So data can be really important to help understand how are you doing, to be able to demonstrate to people, yes, this is working, and to also inform you as to what you want to do next. Sometimes you solve a problem so well that you don't need to measure it anymore. It's fixed and it's permanent, right? And then you tackle the next thing. And there are other problems that you never really get close to solving, so you keep measuring your slow progress. So an example of that, we had a goal at Hewlett Packard for 100% of our consultant population to be a member of at least one community of practice. We never achieved 100%, but that was a timeless goal. But we started out by saying, okay, this year, if we can get to 20%, we will consider that successful. And we did. So then the next year we upped it, and we upped it every year. So eventually you're getting closer and closer to your goal, but you're never going to achieve 100%. You just try to measure and see that you are in fact making progress.
Yep. And actually, that's a really valuable example, because there will be many of those goals that you will just never meet, but you need to have some sort of a target to aim for.
Right.
I know when we spoke probably a couple of weeks ago and just preparing for this, one of the things I made a note on was, as you talked about starting out, there's two things that stood out. One was continuity of KM is crucial. And the second, which is related, is you need to do well, you need to prove the value and continue the function, right? So the continuity point as you go into that maturity stage. And talk a little bit more around the continuity of this, because I think you and I both in agreement that quite frequently it starts off well, but the function almost dies off. Not so much exactly that, but for many reasons, business and otherwise, it dies off. So yeah, what's the importance of continuity here?
Well, it's one of the great challenges of our discipline, because it doesn't have the status of other functions that are institutionalized. So in most major corporations, you wouldn't have an argument about whether you should have a legal department. You would understand that you need it for the very good sound reasons. The same with an HR department and a finance department, so forth. But knowledge management doesn't have that status. It's not assumed that it exists. So therefore, it's usually in a state where people are either starting it up or then questioning, should we continue it? And then if they hit a bump in the road, a financial downturn, or there's an acquisition that occurs, or something goes wrong, that's one of the areas that we look to and say, well, gee, if we have to cut something, we can cut that because we don't really need it. They wouldn't look to cut the HR department, but they would cut the KM department. And that's been true for as long as I've been in the field. What can you do about it? Well, you can't necessarily do anything about that other than do the best job you possibly can. But the forces that are out of your control include change at the top. New executives come in and have to be re-educated. Mergers and acquisitions happen. Economic downturns happen. Right? You have to be prepared for all that. The advice I would give is, if you're doing a good job and you have good relations with the senior executive, and each time they change, you establish new good relations with the next one, and you don't try to get too large and build a giant empire that looks like it's filled with overhead that could be slashed. So those are some things you can do, but even then you won't guarantee. So you have to be prepared for the fact that you may get challenged. You mentioned about proving the value. Proving value is important, but I argue you can't measure value of knowledge management because there's too many variables. It'd be like saying, how do you measure the value of the legal department? You can't really measure it, but you can make a good argument for it. You can say, here's why we should have one. And then later on, if someone questions it, you can say, here are the stories and anecdotes of the people that have used our knowledge management program that benefited them, and they wouldn't have been able to win this business, or we would have lost this money, or we would have suffered this recall, or whatever, that hopefully make the argument that says, yes, we better keep this around and we should continue to invest in it. But if you said, can you compute the ROI of knowledge management, which is often a question I receive, the answer is no, because there's other things that go into results. If you said, did the company thrive, it could be in part because of knowledge management, but in part for other reasons as well.
Yeah, and I think, the proving value point is so important to me personally, because it's something I get asked about a lot around, like, how do we prove the value of this function or this software or this platform, whatever else it might be. And within knowledge management, there are just so many variables. There's too many inputs and outputs that it's almost impossible to put a direct correlation that this happened because of this. And certainly one of the exercises I've gone through that's been quite beneficial is not looking at the return on investment, but the cost of not doing, right? So you almost look at the inverse and say, look, what is the value that your KM function provides? Maybe it's to slash down time and effort required to find content. And really, instead of saying, how do we measure that's been successful, which sometimes is difficult. You can do that in some way, but maybe it's more important to look at, okay, what is the cost of us not doing that? What is the cost of an individual not knowing or not having the information when they need it? If they're working on a case in the law firm context, what is the cost of, you basically not having the right information available to you. So you do a subpar job in drafting an agreement, or you're spending needless time or countless amount of hours on doing something that's been done 100 times within your organization. And I think that that's one way of looking at it, because that becomes absolutely important in just making a claim and just putting a stake in the ground for this is an important function within the business and it serves a purpose, which often doesn't happen. And I see many, and it is very regional, I see many that are maybe better served and have large teams. And there are some where, relative to the size of the organization, you have one person, serving 2,000 individuals. That is not a proportional ratio. So it means that the value isn't being derived properly.
Yeah, I always say you have to make a sound business case up front, and along the lines that you mentioned, you say, what's the cost to us if we lose a big case? What's the cost to us if we have a major product recall? If you're an automotive company, and I live here in Detroit where that's very important, and you had an automotive product recall, that could be hundreds of millions of dollars of cost. And if you prevent it, you can't prove that you prevented it. You can't say, oh, that was $200 million. But I think it's a pretty good argument to make that if we can avoid that, that's worth it. And whatever small relative cost of the KM department compared to that is worth it. So those are good arguments. And then once you're in business for a while, knowledge management does lend itself to be able to collect stories that show its success, especially in communities. If you have communities established, they provide lots of anecdotes within them where people are asking each other for help, and then they get the help, and then they acknowledge it by saying, great, that was just what I needed, and you helped us win this major bid at this client. Yeah. And you just collect those stories right from the communities, and someone says, yeah, I don't know if knowledge management is valuable. You say, well, I happen to have 100 stories that I've collected that prove that it's valuable. And by the way, do you have any examples like that for other things that we invest in? Maybe not. So knowledge management actually is helpful in making its own case as to why it's valuable.
And so talk to me a little bit more about community. You mentioned it a couple of times now, and just so I understand it, because I think my focus when I think about community is building out, and probably a function of my role is building out an external community, right? So gathering experts like yourself and other knowledge managers and so on, so they have a resource, so they have a community where they can ask questions. But do you mean more from a business perspective, a community of internal stakeholders where you've proven value, where you've added benefit? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, communities of practice is something that I've specialized in throughout my career in knowledge management. And in fact, my next book is coming out within the next month, and it's about communities of practice. So I consider that to be sort of the killer app of knowledge management. A community of practice can be internal, external, straddle the two, but an internal community would be one of people who are working in the same area, and they come together to learn and deepen their expertise in it, to solve problems for each other, to learn together. And you usually use a lot for people who are looking for help. So as an example of that, if you had a community that focused on knowledge management and you had all the people who do knowledge management come together, then when one of them is struggling with something, they go to the community and they say, gee, I'm needing help on this. And the other members come forward and they say, I recommend doing the following. And a good example of that in an organization that straddles multiple organizations is the community that I lead, called the SIKM Leaders Community. It's a community of people that work in the knowledge management profession in any company, in any organization around the world. Right now we have about 850 members, and it's been in existence for 15 years. But I can tell you that if any of your listeners join that community, if they ever have any problem or question about knowledge management and they pose it to the community, I can guarantee them that they will get an answer from multiple people who know what they're talking about. So that's how a community works so well. It connects people together who need each other's expertise. Even though they don't know who each other are in advance, they meet in the community.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And certainly, I'll link to a lot of these things. I'll write up a post, because obviously this is video only. So that's really helpful. And I like the idea of the community, because you're really getting, in sort of the famous adage of Kevin Kelly, the 1,000 true fans who are, all behind this one purpose, not so much a goal, because they'll all have individual goals, just willing to help each other out. That's really helpful. And then I guess that starts going into the next stage of the life cycle of the KM function. So, you've proven value, you have a business case, certainly you have enough of a business case that you've hired at least one or two individuals, and being mindful of what you said earlier of not building out an empire, because having a large overhead certainly could be a sign of vulnerability there. As you go into the mature phase of this, how does one know that they are a mature KM function? And there's obviously risk there of measuring yourself against one of the countless maturity models, and you're rating yourself a 1 out of 5 or a 2 out of 5. And maybe that looks bad on paper, but actually, relative to what you need to accomplish, is not bad. So it's talked to me a little bit around how does one know you're mature, and how do you maintain the momentum at that stage then at scale?
So I think the question of maturity models comes up a lot. A lot of people really pay a lot of attention to them. I've written sort of an opposing view that says, along the lines that you did, that a maturity model that you try to slavishly follow is not going to serve you well. What you really want to do is figure out what do your constituents need and serve them. And that may or may not match up with what other companies do. It's helpful to find out what others are doing so you can learn and reuse them. That's practicing knowledge management yourself. But you don't have to do everything that somebody else does if it doesn't fit in your situation. So what I say is, you want to challenge yourself, number one, and you can use others as part of that challenge, but also look and see what it is you think that you still haven't done that you feel should be done. And so as an example, you may have accomplished something. One year, for example, at HP, we set a goal of having a project team space for every one of our customer projects. And at first, that wasn't the case, but by the end of the year, it was. And then we could declare success and say that in that area, we've accomplished that. We don't need to worry about it anymore. What's our next challenge? So I think maturity really, to me, means that you've achieved some of your goals already, but that you're constantly challenging yourself to take on new ones and never be satisfied, never think that you're done. Instead, say we're moving on to another phase, we're taking on a new challenge, constantly asking your users what do they think you could do to improve, what things are yet to be accomplished, and then taking those on. And then as far as maturity models go, the danger with them is either you'll feel bad because you rate 2 out of 5 and you feel like, oh gee, we're not doing well, when in fact you may be doing really well because you're meeting all the requirements of your situation. Or the flip side, you pat yourself on the back because you're rated a 5 and you think, oh, gee, we've got this nailed. In reality, you're not doing a good job at all, just that you arbitrarily meet some criteria on a model. So I'd say don't worry about models. Test yourself in terms of, are we meeting all the things that people that we're serving want? Are our executives happy? Are our users happy? Are we meeting the vision that we set out? And if you've accomplished everything, which is doubtful that you could do, then great, just keep doing it. But more likely there'll be the next thing that was on your list. So for me, for example, for years I wanted to have a rewards and recognition system. It was like a frequent flyer program. It took me many, many years from when I first thought of that till we finally implemented it. So the point is, there's usually going to be something like that, a holy grail or a golden fleece that you're looking for and that you have to keep working towards. And when you finally get it, you feel good about it. But then there's the next thing that you think, what can we do next?
Yeah, and I think that's so important because again, I think people do tend to get lost in the mist of models and just having these things already pre-made. And I mean, there is advantage to that. So I think they are good as a blueprint or a benchmark, but they do need to be customized. I like what you said about being able to declare success. So you should have some sort of a goal or some sort of a initiative that at the end of which, across a set time period, you're like, awesome, let's celebrate, because that is also equally important. Tell me a little bit, just a little bit offhand actually, tell me a little bit more about this rewards and recognition program. How did that work? What was that about?
So when I started out running KM at Digital in '96, I pretty soon figured out that in order to provide an explicit motivation to people to do the tasks that we wanted them to do, like join communities, post in them, contribute documents, reuse content, so forth, that it would be helpful if we had something like a frequent flyer rewards program where you earn points for doing these things, because that's a very visible and tangible way for people to realize, okay, this is what you want me to do, and here's recognition that I'm getting back that I'm doing it. So that was my goal. I used to run afoul of the HR department. I didn't want to do stuff like that, and I couldn't get the IT department to build the systems, but eventually I persisted enough. It wasn't until 8 or 9 years later that we built that for the first time at HP, and we called it KM Stars. And it was a frequent flyer light program where you earn points for doing things. We assembled the leaderboards and published those. And we didn't know how it would work, but this is another principle you want to always follow. Even if you don't know something will work, you should try it and see, right? And if it doesn't work, you can either adapt and improve, or you can move on to something else. So we tried it out. We definitely had to tweak it. Our first approach to it, we had to change because, for instance, we were originally asking you to fill in a form if you wanted to get points for reuse. And we found out people didn't want to fill in a form. So we abandoned that. We just made it so that whatever you did was automatically captured. So there was no extra work. So you got a point every time you posted something in a community discussion. You got 5 points for contributing a document to the knowledge repository. You got 10 points if you wrote a peer-reviewed white paper that was published, okay? And then you tallied them up. And then initially, the recognition part of it was all there was. There was no tangible reward. It's just you saw your name on the leaderboard. And that often motivates people, seeing their name and competing and having fun. That was a big part of it. We did that for a while with success. But then we moved to a second phase where I asked the senior executive if we could actually give out financial rewards along with the points recognition. And she agreed to that, and we initiated that. And once a month, I selected 3 winners. I tried to have them be from 3 different parts of the world, so we had some geographic diversity. And they were acknowledged as the KM Star of the month, and they received a financial reward. And there are some people that worry about that and think that that will cause gaming and malfeasance, whatever, but we did not experience that. In fact, we found that it caused a lot of energy to go in. People had a lot of fun with it. Certain countries of the world really had energy for it. And the best part of it was when they won the award, we'd recognize them, but then I would ask them to write me 2 paragraphs and tell me how they got to be a KM Star. Those were the best success stories that I could have, better than anything I could write. And if someone ever asked me, what's the value of KM? I could say, read the stories of all of our KM Stars. They'll tell you in their own words what they did and how it helped them do their job better. So to me, it was a big success, and several other companies ended up copying it and reusing it.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm so glad I went down this tangent, because I'm absolutely going to steal that from you with full credit. And I think it's certainly a good initiative to build on top of. We only have probably about 5 minutes or so left, maybe a bit less. And I do want to, I'll wrap up and conclude, and point people to some resources. Do you have any, I guess, parting words that people should ponder as they are? So if you imagine you are speaking to a KM knowledge manager who has a function that's maybe 2 to 5 years old. Any parting words of wisdom on what they should be thinking about in terms of next step for the next, 12 to 24 months?
I think one thing is that you have to have your sort of your objectives in a queue where you know the ones you currently have and you have the ones that are coming along. If you can declare success on one, what's the next one you're going to replace it with? I'd say keep abreast of trends in the field, but don't get dazzled by the latest hot thing. That often happens in our field. Something comes and everybody gets obsessed with it, and there isn't necessarily a really practical value of it. So pay attention, but don't get too far down the path of just following the latest fad. I don't think the field has really changed all that much in the time I've been practicing it. New technologies come along periodically, but otherwise at the fundamental core, it's the same. So just keep sticking with those fundamentals of what you're trying to do and how you're trying to get people to behave in a certain way, and recognize them for that, and keep doing it, and stay connected to your peers in the field. I always tell people you should be practicing knowledge management yourself. So that means you should be active in communities, and you should be talking to people doing it. And you should be reusing the good ideas of others and setting the example. So if you're leading a knowledge management program and you're not a good user yourself, that's not good. You should be perceived as a really good user. Yeah. You should understand what it takes, what problems people may face, so you can help solve them. And if someone asks you, well, what do you expect me to do? You should be able to say, here's what I expect you to do, and I'm doing that too.
Yeah. And yeah, that is a fantastic place to wrap up. So, we covered so much, although albeit most of it was the tip of the iceberg. And I would say, probably going backwards, it's important to understand actually where we started today. What does KM mean to you, to your business? And think about that Venn diagram of, what does it mean to the execs, to the frontline workers, and to you personally? And how do you achieve that? A couple of places I want people to go look into, certainly. You can actually just Google Stan's name, and he has a wonderful, talk about practicing what you preach. He has a great Google Sites where he actually has detailed and segmented and categorized all the work that he's published. And trust me, he's a prolific writer and author. So there's a lot of points to read. Start with 5 benefits of KM. Look at the opportunity survey. I would say, and certainly I'll be looking out for the Community of Practice, the book that's coming out next month. If you want to learn a bit more around how data and analytics play a part within this, I actually spoke to Mick Seehey from PwC yesterday, and they've just published a case study that actually talks specifically about some metrics to monitor for KM. So have a look at that. That'll be coming out in a couple of weeks. And for those in the legal sphere, if you go and look at the Fringe Legal Library, I've spoken to Tao Tran, to Nikki Shaver, Alison Hosking, and Kate Simpson, all KM managers from different parts of the world and organizations that talk about what KM means to them and practical examples of what things are. Steal the KM Stars initiative for sure. And I think I'll wrap up with challenge yourself. That was the underlying thing. Try it out, see how it goes, and then build on top of that. So with that, thank you, Stan, so much for joining me today. What a wonderful conversation. Love to chat to you again. And for everyone else listening, have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.